All right, good afternoon. Welcome back to our series on building reinforcement learning agents to work through Pokemon Red. Last time we had implemented scoring penalties on the agent for not exploring frequently and then not following or finding new locations. So we've given it a grace period of 50 steps once it makes a move to start moving again to a new location. The issue here being that the agents can sometimes be in battle, and so that's why you want to give it a bit of a grace period. You don't want it to go to a trainer square and then while it's fighting the trainer, get stuck in the battle or a random Pokemon encounter, because it had basically been learning to always run from the encounters when they're happening, rather than actually complete the battle to gain the experience or to capture new Pokemon. So we put in a grace period for that before the penalty starts accumulating. And then last time we'd also put almost like a maximum on this reward in terms of the penalty that it would receive. So there's a 450 step window here where it would receive penalties for not moving. And that would hopefully encourage it to move. And then the idea being that it would be offset by the novelty reward when it moves to a new square. It would get the minimum of either the window, which is 500 steps right now, or the difference in the step count and the last seen step. But what ended up happening is that the agents stopped basically exploring the map altogether. I let it run almost 50 million steps, and it had decided that it was best to do nothing in the game and just kind of sit in Professor Oak's lap. And the reason for this is that there were a few mistakes in how this was implemented. The first thing is that the novelty reward isn't accumulating enough to offset the stuck penalty. And so what you see here is how we implemented this is that the two of these sums add together to determine the score. And the stuck penalty is always negative across all the runs. And that's because this was not implemented correctly in the last seen step. Basically, every step that the game proceeds through was then updating this value to be that number. So if we were on step 10,000, it would be step 10,000. But that wasn't what the intent was here. The intent was for it to figure out the last new step that it had gone through. So it should not update every single step that the agent takes. It should update every time that a new novelty reward would have been obtained, which means that the coordinate string should not be in this last scene, or sorry, the scene coords list. So the issue is that this is on the wrong line, essentially, and should be a part of this else statement. The other thing is that there's some confusion. We have a variable here called last seen step, and then a self variable also called last seen step. And so I'm just going to change the name here. This should be the last new step. In terms of, and so then I need to also go up and find the last seen step here, because this should be the last new step. What we see here in these scene coordinates, which is the outcome that we want here, the stuck penalty, if we want to look at how that's calculated, it's basically 1/10 of a point, but that's also being multiplied by the exploration weight, which what we have set right here is 1/100th of a point. So this ends up being 1,000th of a point overall for every instance that or every step that it has not moved between the window that we set, the 50 to 500 steps. Now, this then is much smaller than that, a power of 10 smaller, because this is 1/10,000th for the novelty reward times the difference in either the window or the last new step. And so we're also going to take this and we're going to basically delete out one of the zeros. And now these are basically the same in terms of what should be accumulating here. So when it doesn't move, it's going to accumulate 1/1000th of a point deduction. And then every time it finds a new step location, it's going to then get the step increase here by the difference in the current step minus that last new step or the window. So no matter what, it's going to get an increase here because this grace period does not affect what's happening here at all. And so the novelty reward should always outweigh the stuck penalty. The idea here is that it's moving ultimately within this grace period if possible. So that way the agents keep moving along. It's accumulating novelty reward at a rate that is faster than the stuck penalty, right? And if it doesn't even get to that grace period, it never encounters the stuck penalty. So it keeps exploring more and more. So hopefully this increases the productivity of the agents in terms of exploring the map. And we don't have an issue here where it essentially has not moved out of the start area. There were a few iterations when I checked on it where it had at least made it into the grassy area. This is the run before the one I showed you. You can see never really proceeding through its exploration, accumulating 0. The exploration here, that means it explored 100 tiles, basically. But this is almost just within Professor Oak's office. So it never really moved out, but you can see here almost always the stuck value is negative. And we don't want that to be the case. The stuck should be deducting from the new, but never really accumulating. This is another run before that. You can see here, it basically determined that moving anywhere is not worth the thing because the stuck penalty stops essentially for it from accumulating. The reason why we had put the 500 high-end range on that stuck penalty was because of instances where the agent will get sent back to a place incidentally, whether it had died or something along those lines. So what would happen here is that the agent had not accumulated any new steps, right, for a while because it had been sent back, let's say, all the way to Pallet Town from Viridian, but then it's moving along the path to try and proceed back, but now it's getting penalized for doing so, right, because it's not finding new locations. It's revisiting those same step locations. So that was the idea between having it set up this way, where if it had seen, or it would take this coordinate and it would take the last time that it had seen that step and then determine if it was between those windows. So if it's staying in the same place, the last seen step is just a step before it, which would mean then that it accumulates, it would accumulate the penalty, right, because it had not moved. And so I think how we want to do this is instead of relying on the last seen step, everything's just going to run off of the last new step variable that we see here. And then when it moves to a location that is not in there, we're going to update this value to be that case. So then taking out the last seen step here is now the last new step. We don't need this line anymore because we have no reason to be, we're not using it anywhere, so there's no reason to put it into the memory at all. So now, as long as that grace period is between the last new step, which we will update here, it will then accumulate that stuck penalty. If we see that battles are going longer, which may happen more or towards the later portions of the game, we can find a way to, I guess, scale up what's happening here, so that way it will continue to make progress. But let's make sure we can get to that point first, rather than having this situation or boiling the ocean in terms of figuring out a solution for this. So I can see it easily in the later parts of the game once trainers have many Pokemon that we will get beyond the 50-step actions. But hopefully we will get to that, because that means that the agents are progressing through the game at a significant rate. So the hope here is that we can have the agents continuing to learn and explore the map through this, and we don't end up in a scenario, like I said here, where the agents are not actually making game progress. They're essentially standing still so they don't get penalized along the way. So I'm trying to find if there is another one here in the memory. We can go to the end of it and I can just show you, because we consolidate everything at the end of a run, or the 200,000 steps for each of the agents, to figure out how much even the maximum movement had occurred there. So here we are. So these are all the agents on their run, and you can see here almost all of them have very basic exploration rewards. None of them are even really doing anything with the inventories themselves. And you can see here the maximum coordinates that it visited is 10 across all the runs, 40 total map locations. So this is because we are not starting at the very beginning of the game. We are starting after it had returned to Oak's lab at the very beginning. And you can see here, it didn't get anything for healing, any events, and no additional Pokemon caught. So what we're hoping here is that by making these adjustments, it will increase the productivity of the agents. So what I'll do now is I'll transition to having the agents run for us on the stream. Again, at the very beginning, it will not do much in terms of moving around and exploring. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull in this cerulean checkpoint from before to see if the agents will make progress. We are using Squirtle as a starter again. This is the one that I had 24 agents training at the time. 5 or 6 of them had made it into Cerulean Gym and succeeded. So the hope here is that it will pick those up and make that same amount of progress. If I see that it's resetting while the agents are still exploring, I will extend the episode length here. Right now it's at 200,000 steps, but if it needs to, we can extend this up to 400,000. We should be okay to have those run while the stream is processing. So what I'll do is I will end this part of the VOD, so that way we can have it for later in terms of the progression and changes video series, and then I'll bring everything back up online with the agents actually doing their learning. So I will see you here in a few moments.